I'm Doris Epstein, and you're watching MENSCHlife TV. All over the world, in any country where there's a sizable population of Jews, there's a Maccabi organization. It's an intrinsic part of Jewish life. Today, we're going to be looking at Maccabi Canada with Dr. Tommy Bacher, president of Maccabi Canada, and Michael Epstein, head coach of the men's basketball team. And to start with, let's look at this picture. The silver medal at the recent Pan Am Games.
Great accomplishment. You know, we at the beginning when we formed the team, we talk about success. So success is competitively, but success is also the experience that the guys on the team, witness and
This
experience.
was in December in Brazil.
Sao Paulo, Brazil.
But we think of Maccabi Games as taking place in Israel. What is this in Brazil? How does this work?
So the Maccabi movement is based in Ramat Gan, in what's called Maccabi World Union. And they have their own headquarters there. It's a beautiful facility. And Maccabi World Union is made up of is the largest Jewish organization in the world with over 450,000 members.
450,000
450,000 members. And now up to about 70 countries. And just as a quick aside, when you mention with any sizable Jewish population, for the first time we are reaching out to smaller communities for the next games. And there'll be teams from, I think, another 15 or so countries of communities between 500 and 12,000 Jewish athletes, including the team from Cuba with 52 athletes marching into the stadium. So the Maccabi Games, the pinnacle, the highlight of the game, of the movement is the Maccabi Games themselves, which is an Olympic-style event that happens every 4 years. And the next games will be next July, in July 2013, in Israel. And for the first time, the opening ceremonies will actually be in Jerusalem.
The first time? Why hasn't it been
Well,
Jerusalem
it's always
before?
been the main stadium has been based in Tel Aviv and Ramat Gan. But now I think the message is that we want to promote the fact that Jerusalem is the center and the capital of Israel. And the mayor, Nir Barkat, has decided that that's what he wanted to do. And they've actually spent a lot of money to refurbish that stadium. And there'll be something like about 40,000 seats in the stadium in Jerusalem. So our athletes will be marching in there. So these games take place every 4 years. And last time there was 7,500 athletes from 55 countries. In these games, there'll be approximately 8,500 to 8,800 athletes from 70 countries, competing in about 35 sports. And it's the third largest Olympic-style sporting event in the world. And so that's what the Maccabi Games. Getting back to these games, we also have regional games, the same way they have Pan American Games. In the non-Jewish world, we have Pan American Games at the same time every 4 years in the 2-year cycle in between the games. So in the mid of the 4-year cycle, we have games in a South American location. At the same year, they have European Games. This past year was in Vienna. So those are called regional games, and they happen every 4 years. I've personally been to games in Mexico and Chile and Venezuela and now Brazil. And it really is an amazing event. It sort of energizes the entire Jewish community in these countries. They all get behind it, and they have amazing facilities. And I'm sure Michael and I were both impressed by the Hebraica that they had in Sao Paulo.
We consider it a fixture in Jewish life, but actually, the Maccabi Games didn't start 1,000 years ago. How did it start?
So it started in 1932 in the first games. It was really a sort of a reaction to the fact that Jews were not allowed to actually compete for their countries in the Olympic Games. And so it became this offshoot games in 1932 and then in 1935. And then the next time they had the games was actually...
Jews all over were not allowed to compete?
In a large part of the countries, in Germany and a lot of the other countries, they weren't allowed. So,
oh, sure, this was 1932. Right. It was already starting.
Correct. And then the next games, the third games, they had a break during 35 on, and the next games were actually in Israel, in the actual country of Israel, in 1950. And from then, they had games in 1953, and then every 4 years from that point up until now. The only time the games were sort of challenged was in 2001 when the Intifada broke out. There was some decision that needed to be made whether countries were going to compete, and a lot of countries pulled out, and a lot of athletes pulled out. But Canada was one of the countries that came with a very strong delegation in 2001, and were there to support the Israelis. And it was truly appreciated by everyone. People were running at us in the streets and grabbing us and hugging us and thanking us for being there.
Because people were staying away, not just
people were staying away.
athletes.
A lot of trips were canceled. We were one of the few trips. As I said, it's the largest organization in the world. So when we come for the Maccabi Games, it's the single largest gathering of Jews at any one time in Israel. So it's a big deal there for sure.
Whenever we talk about largest gathering of Jews, because of the recent spate of violence and murders, my mind immediately goes to security. You have a lot of Jews in one place. It's almost asking for trouble. How do you handle that? Are people intimidated by that? Did any of the kids not come because of that?
No,
Ever?
No, that's never. It's a given that Maccabi will take care of security. It's communicated right from the beginning to coaches, managers, and athletes.
What about when it's not in Israel? What about, was there security
So I
at
can
these?
tell you a little bit about the security there. They had security at the local level. For instance, our hotel where we stayed had this amazing security. It was very evident all throughout the hotel. They had the local police. They had the Jewish organizations that provided security. And because these games were sort of a forerunner to the World Cup of Soccer and the next Olympics in 2016 in Sao Paulo, the federal government used this as a test run to test their security. And so we had an enormous amount of people, I think about 1,000 people from the federal government security also looking after us. So it was really well organized. We were all communicated. We provided a security person from Brazil to talk to our delegation as soon as we arrived, and so everybody knew what they could do, what they couldn't do, and fortunately I felt pretty comfortable down there.
Yeah,
Did you feel safe?
Yeah.
All right.
The city itself wasn't so safe, but the surrounding the games was completely safe.
We'll get back in just a minute. Stay with us. Maccabi Canada. Maccabi Canada. We're at the Pan Am Games that just happened in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, in December, where you won the silver medal. But you were responsible for putting together a team of boys. What are the ages?
Ages 20 to 30, roughly.
From across Canada. How did you do that? You have a full life with your job, with your business, and you had to go, you had to travel. But how did you do this?
You know, I've been coaching for 20 years at a provincial level, so you get to know a lot of the best players in the city, in the province, and you hear of the Jewish players across the country. That's one. Two, you make contact with other Maccabi delegates that have been involved in the program for a number of years, JCC community, other coaches, et cetera, and you just stumble upon them. You know, when I set out to form the team, I wanted to look in every single solitary province to find not only the best kids skill-wise, but one of the best kids experience-wise. And because the intangible of the bond that they form will help them succeed in the games.
How can you create that kind of bond to consolidate a team when they're not here?
It's incredible. That is the most difficult thing. The biggest challenge. I've played high school basketball and coached for 20 years. I've never been involved in a team. I coached Maccabi at the junior Maccabi games in Buenos Aires, Pan Am Games. It's so difficult to form a team a long distance relationship. You know, most teams you play together 3 to 4 times a week. High school teams play every single day. So we did different things. We every 2 weeks on a Sunday night we'd have a conference call. We would talk about things like fundraising, conditioning, skills, experiences, 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and at least people wouldn't be familiar with their voices. And then when we got together, we had 3 training camps in Toronto where we flew everyone in together for 2 days.
Before the games, before you left
before
for
the games.
Brazil.
You know, to create, you know, some systems, we created goals for the team, you know, offensive plays, defensive plays, systems that we're going to follow to succeed in the games. And it all builds an intangible asset in terms of the bond that the guys on the team develop.
The spirit is just as important and the relationships. So
it's more
you're not just you're building a team physically, and you're building a team of relationships.
Yeah, I chose, there are at least 3 players across the country that have all played CIS, which is Canadian University level, currently and past. I chose not to take them because I didn't feel they were a good fit from an emotion point of view in building the bond. And from my own experience and for the guys, you know, on the team.
A lot of factors go into choosing and making up teams. Harder when they're not here, but I imagine that applies to all the teams that participate.
So we've just now finished our process of selecting our coaches for the next games in Israel. And people from across the country apply. And we have a group of people called our National Athletic Committee, headed by a gentleman named Alex Branis and assisted by Ashley Kochman. And they went through over 100 applications for all of our various teams, different age groups, different sports. And the same process that Michael talked about in choosing his players, we sort of use those same kind of process in picking the right people, because people like Michael make the organization look good. They do a great job. The athletes come to the games. They're well prepared. They understand what it's all about. They get it. They come back. They stay together. They become ambassadors for Israel, and that's really the big issue.
They become ambassadors for Israel?
The ones who come back from the games in Israel will hopefully do that, and these young athletes here will come back and be ambassadors for Maccabi Canada, and for the message of sport and how important sport is in people's lives. And that's part of why I'm here, and part of the message of what we're trying to do in the bigger organization, in the bigger group.
Did you play anything?
I was pretty fortunate. Back in 1985, I made the Canadian men's softball team. It was the first softball tournament that they had in the Maccabi Games. And I was fortunate to make it. I was probably the 13th or 14th out of 14 people to make the team. And I was 34. The rest of the kids were like 19, 20. But we all had this bond. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. If one of those kids that came up to me 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 years later, or today, and I haven't seen them since the games, we would be like we had never been apart. We spent a year working together. We trained 3 times a week in Toronto, those of us in Toronto, and then we had 3 or 4 training camps, as Michael's team did. We spent, 3 of us lived in a room about 10 feet by 10 feet for 3 weeks, and we became best friends. And we were there for each other.
That's one of the best results and outcomes of it, is the relationships you form with the players and the coaches. Forever.
You played basketball all your life. And is it different playing? What's the difference between playing and coaching?
It's much different. You know, as a coach, you're a teacher, you're a role model, you're a different form of leader, you're an instructor, you're a disciplinarian if need be. As a player, you follow a program and you fulfill a role with certain responsibilities to achieve team goals. It's different. Just the perspectives are completely different.
Would you take it on again? This was an enormous task.
It's the second time I've done it.
What was the first one?
Pan Am Games in Buenos Aires in 2007.
You'll tell us about that in just a minute. And how many people went, and who also goes with the team. It's just not the team. We'll be back in a minute. Tommy, Michael, you would give so much of your lives to Maccabi Canada. It could be a full-time job in itself. Why do you do it?
I'll let Michael sort of start with that.
There's a whole bunch of reasons, actually. I first learned about the Maccabi program from my uncle in Montreal, who played in the 1961 games. I'm not sure if you knew that.
No, didn't know that
He
at
was
all.
on the basketball team. So I became familiar with Maccabi through him. And then through high school, the guys that I played in the city with, the Jewish guys, the Maccabi program was bigger than making the college level. It was like pro. And in fact, there's a funny story. A friend of mine who's a few years older than me who got cut from the team, very good player in his day, one of the best in the city. And he got cut twice from 2 different games. I met him. I got appointed the coach in November, December 2010. I saw him in January 2011. And we're having lunch, and I said, I'm the coach of the Maccabi team. And he said, amazing, I could finally make the team. It stays with you because it was something that everybody aspired to be part of. So I grew up in it. I grew up, appreciating it. The connection to Israel and things like that helped. And then the love of basketball. Love of basketball, competing, and connected to the Jewish identity really makes a difference.
And you?
So, it's the opportunity to be the best you can be. I think that's really what drives most of us. We're all athletes to some level or other. As I said, I was probably better than the average, but I certainly wasn't the top 2 or 3 guys on our team by any stretch of the imagination. But I took it very seriously, as I'm sure Michael did with his basketball. And the opportunity to walk around saying you're the best Jewish, in my case, softball team in the world, or the best Jewish sprinter, or the best Jewish. Most of us are not going to the Olympics, so we're hoping to have one of our players at the next games be an Olympic competitor in London. We'll find out in a few months. But for most of us, this is our Olympics. And to be the best you can be is an amazing motivator for people. And I know that personally, from a personal story, I trained as hard as I've ever trained in my life to try to make a team that started with 250 athletes from across the country. And so for me, I knew about Israel. I really wasn't all that connected to Israel. My family are certainly very pro-Israel. But I was, as I said, 33, 34. I'd had a full life of being a physician and kids. And so I made this team, and I felt really proud. And I like to tell people that I call it Tommy Bacher pride because I felt proud of what I did. I made this team. And then you get to go over to Israel, and you walk around in the village, and you're wearing Canada clothing, and people walk around to you, way to go, congratulations. And I still felt what I called Tommy Bacher pride. And then it came time to go to the opening ceremonies. We were in the backfield for 3 hours with about the other 2,500, 3,000 athletes back in those days. And then they called for Canada. And I was fortunate. I was placed on the outside row of my row, and Canada comes in, and they're talking about Canada. And now you start to get a sense of the enormity of what this is all about. There's 40,000 people there. I played in front of 300 people in my life, maybe, in one time. And I knew my parents were in the crowd, along with in the audience, along with another 15 or so parents from our team. But I had no idea where. And then you walk in, there's Canadian flags all around the stadium. So I walk in, and we had these big cowboy hats. We're supposed to doff them to the president of Israel as we walk in. And I'm just dumbfounded. I'm seeing Canadian flags everywhere. So I get to the president's booth, and I doff my cap to the president, and hanging over the rafters with the video camera was my dad. And at that point, I sort of lost it a bit, and I realized that I felt really proud of what I'm doing, but really good for them, because a lot of what happened to me was because of what they did for me, obviously, as most of us can say. And so then we carried on. We ended up on the infield, and then it came time to light the torch. And the torchbearer for our year was Mark Spitz, who at the time was the greatest Jewish athlete of all time. And that was great. And I still felt really good about what I had done. Look where I am. Look what I'm watching. And I thought, oh, this is great. And then all of a sudden, 3 young girls joined in behind Mark. So I went there in 1985, and these girls were 13 years old. And it turned out that 2 of them were 2 months old, and 1 of them had not been born yet when their fathers were murdered in Munich. They were part of the Israeli.
Were murdered where?
They were part of the Israeli contingent, the Olympic team in Munich, that were killed in Munich. And at that point in time, you had 40,000 people in a stadium crying, and basically all of us saying that we're going to be here and we're never going to let this happen again. And my pride changed from being Tommy Bacher pride to being proud to be Jewish, proud to be partners with Israel. And it changed in 5 seconds, and it's been like that ever since. And so from that moment on, it's been very easy to stay connected. And I dare say that if I had you come march in with Canada across your chest and you march in the games with us in 2013, you won't need to ask the question. It'll be there forever. And it's the easiest sell we have, is just getting people to come with us. So that's where I am.
I share that view. It's a great experience, great feeling, something that you don't get to do in your whole life.
It's truly amazing. And my job now is, as all of us together as an organization, is to make sure that we give everybody the best possible experience that we can possibly have. So part of what I'm doing here is making sure that we use elite sports, which has a real benefit, as Michael's expounded, on its own.
What are the sports, by the way? What are the sports?
Every sport that you can possibly imagine, including things like netball. And we have
Netball?
we're sending a cricket team this time for the first time. We're sending equestrians. We're sending back ice hockey this time. So in every other sport you can possibly think of is in these games. But my job, and the job of all of us in Maccabi Canada, which is a truly volunteer-driven organization, is to make sure that our athletes have the best possible experience, which involves being the best they can be in their sport. And then we all understand that sport, growing up playing sports as a young person, tends to give you the qualities that you need to be leaders. And a large number of our kids who've come back have become the leaders in our communities, not just the Jewish community, but communities across Canada. And that's been a major plus of what we do, helping people understand that a healthy lifestyle is so critical. So that's really important. But also, what we really want to do in Maccabi Canada is use those people who come to us through elite sports and connect them to their Jewish identity, to their heritage, to understand what Israel is all about. So for the first time ever, we're going to be having a 5-day pre-camp for our open and junior athletes in Israel, where our athletes will go for 5 days early. They will train in the morning, and then they will go and tour. And we have a whole committee set up to set those things up. So they will then see the country, they'll see the rich heritage of Israel, they'll learn all about the country and the people. And then during the games, we're actually going to ask our athletes to give a half day of volunteering in the country, all over the country, so that they will give back as well as take. And that combined with the ability to play sports at a really high level and be the best you can be is an opportunity to experience something that you just can't normally get. And I would be remiss if I didn't sort of say that our biggest challenge is going to be taking our athletes, and hopefully it won't be much of a challenge, and helping them become embedded in our communities as ambassadors for the games and for Israel, and hopefully for Jewish identity and Jewish pride.
When we come back, we'll find out what the kids are getting out of it, and who are they, and what's involved. Back in a minute. You have how many people, not just kids, it's adults too, how many people from Canada altogether are involved in the games?
So in the Pan Am Games, which Michael was at, we took 142 Canadians, and that included the athletes, coaches, assistant coaches, medical team. We take a full medical team every time we go to a games, and we have world-class medical people, both physios, athletic therapists, and doctors. And also support staff. So we have an amazing executive director, Tali Dabrowski, and a great national office director, and Kathy Dinetz right now. And we're just simply taking advantage of the quality of people we have to go down there and make sure that things are run the way they should be run from our organization. And maybe Michael should be the one to talk about whether that was accomplished or not in Brazil.
Yeah, very successfully. Better, I coached in the Pan Am Games in Buenos Aires 4 years prior. Big difference in terms of executing the entire program that must take upwards to 2 years to organize.
Pretty much, yeah. I would say none of us slept for the last 2 months prior to the game, that's for sure. Yeah.
And now you're gearing up for Israel.
Right, so for Israel, we'll have, last time, I can go by last time, we hope to be a little bit larger, but even last time we sent 400 athletes to the games, and then the rest of the other 125 people were a full medical team. We had, I think, 16 or 17 people on our medical team. We have chaperones, we have coaches and assistant coaches, we have trainers, our managers for the teams that help out with the logistics. We're adding a couple of different streams, and we're adding a whole logistics team in now, which will look after everything that's non-sports. So if you're having a problem with your hotel, you're having a problem with transportation, with getting in water for your practices, we're going to have a whole separate group of people, which we've never had that group before, specific for that they'll be part of that.
Those are the little details that can make or break the experience for the athletes. Warming up in a gym at 40 degrees Celsius and there's no water. It drives the coach crazy, but the players crazy too. And it makes a difference in terms of being taken care of. Transportation after a game in Buenos Aires, we'd finish a game in a 40-degree temperature in the gym to go to 42 degrees outside, and there wouldn't be a bus. So we'd be running around, scrambling around to find taxis in incredible heat after these guys had played games. That was all, those are experiences and things you learn about, I guess, organizationally, that in this Pan Am game was much better. It was executed much better.
Each time you do, you learn something to improve the next time.
There's no question about that, right? And we hope to capitalize that. We hope to be much more proactive and more prepared. So, for instance, we were just talking, Tali and I, yesterday about the fact that we're hoping to send our clothing package to our athletes out 2 months in advance, not a week before.
A clothing package?
So all of our athletes get clothing that they march in the opening ceremonies with, and shorts and T-shirts and Canadian paraphernalia that they walk around with and there, plus their participation uniforms. I mean, Michael's basketball team's uniforms were designed by one of our guys, and I think they were quite nice. And so we're hoping to send that out 2 months in advance, so people have a chance to change and see what they like, what they don't like, and fix stuff that they need to fix. And
well, it gets them in the groove of the games.
And
it gets them thinking and excited about, the countdown to the games.
just watching these young athletes putting Canada on their back, and on their front, it does get them very excited. I had a nephew of mine play in Australia, and Australia's another one of those regional games that happens every 4 years, the year after the Maccabi games, and he went to Australia and played basketball for us, and he just loved it. He thought it was fantastic, and he didn't trade any of his Canadian stuff. I hardly traded any of my Canadian stuff.
What do the kids say about this experience?
They love it. They love the team bonding of the guys on the team. They love the trading of uniforms at the end. It's a free-for-all. Everybody wants mementos from the game, so one of the Canadian athletes will trade to, with Brazil or Israel for, shorts, T-shirts, hats, whatever it is. It's all lifetime experiences.
I think what they like the most is the competition. They're playing at a higher level competition they've probably ever played at before, and maybe the highest that they'll play at in their life. And I think this is not necessarily a once-in-a-lifetime, but maybe a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for some of these kids.
It's the Jewish Olympics. They aspire to be the best, and they want to win. They lose. There's a lot of moments where they just forget about the fact that it's the Jewish Olympics. It's just like the Olympics. And, in the men's program this year, Brazil had a guy that could play pro. Brazil lost to the U.S. in the open round by 1 on a last-second shot. It made ESPN Brazil. That's the big time. That's what our guys sort of talk about.
We had a Masters basketball team as well as an open team that Michael coached. And our Masters basketball team were 8 guys only, and they had to play 5 days in a row, 6 days in a row. So it was kind of tough. They were 45 to 50 typically. One of our athletes was Dan Schulman, and Dan Schulman is voted the play-by-play sports announcer of the decade by Sports Illustrated. So this gentleman calls Sunday Night Baseball on TV and NCAA basketball and NBA basketball. I heard him last night calling the Knicks game. So he's been involved in major sports events. And he was a player that didn't play all that much, but played significant minutes and came off the court after they beat Brazil in the semifinal game with a 7-footer on the Brazil team, and Dan at 6'4", being our tallest player, and said it was the best event that he's ever been at. And it just got to him to the point where he just couldn't stop talking about it. It also helped that there was 100 Canadians in the stands going crazy as we came from 10 points down with a few minutes to go and win that game. And that's a feeling that most of us won't forget, whether we were in the stands or whether they're on the team. And those are the kind of memories that are created among all of our athletes. And I think it's just an opportunity for our athletes to grow as people. And we're reaching out to kids who perhaps aren't going to be reached by the traditional Jewish organizations. We have kids who are Jewish by our definition of Jewish, which is one parent or the other parent, one or more or both biological parents being Jewish or having converted. And we reach out to kids who are playing in a secular world. They play at a very high level. They don't play with any other Jewish athletes.
So it's often that's their only connection to any kind of Jewish.
Only connection to Jewish, exactly right. And they're not going to get there any other way. So our goal is to find these people, help them become even better athletes, and then help them reach out to their Jewish past and strengthen their Jewish identity. And I think one of the athletes that made Aliyah from Canada last games was a young man from Western Canada who really was exactly in that scenario.
Well, tell us about this after the break. I want to hear about this guy.
I will.
Made Aliyah as a result of his experience with Maccabi Canada.
Absolutely.
This is an enormous undertaking and an enormous financial undertaking, and yet you're a totally volunteer organization, and nobody gives you any money. How do you survive?
I wouldn't say nobody gives us any money. I would say none of the agencies, UJA, for instance, up till now have not supported us.
You don't give anything.
Right. We survive. We're a self-funded group of organization that's based on the generosity of donors and a large part of our athletes. Our athletes are asked to fundraise the cost of their trip.
How much does it cost per athlete?
Sao Paulo, the Pan Am Games were $6,000 per athlete. It's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money. And in Israel is actually more because the cost of Israel, what Israel charges us for accrediting each of our athletes is a set amount for the whole world. All right? Now, not every country pays that, but Canada does pay the full amount. So in our way, we are actually subsidizing 50 of the 55 countries from the last games were subsidized. 5 countries paid the full amount, which we were one. So this time we're hoping that the cost will be somewhere between $8,000 and $8,500 an athlete. We're hoping to be able to give some subsidies to our open athletes, our truly elite athletes. We'll see how that goes. And we're hoping to have a fund left over called an Adopt an Athlete program, where we can help out athletes who need to reach a certain amount and just have tried their best. We give them methods of how to do that and just can't reach that number, and they come to us for assistance. And we're hoping that we won't have to leave anybody at home because of funding issues. And that's our goal, that every qualified athlete, you make the team because you're an elite athlete, and we hope that every one of those athletes manages to go, and we're doing our best to sort of raise those dollars. And we've gone to certain foundations and individuals, and we've had some great support from people around the country in the past. And again, other organizations and people individually have stepped up already to help us. We have a long way to go. And we raise dollars through personal campaigns with individuals and with corporations. We also raise money through donations through events. So we just had a major event called the Sports Unplugged Dinner, hosted by Dan Schulman, the sports announcer. We had 8 sports media people from the Toronto area, Jewish sports media people. We hosted 350 people, and it was a up-close and personal kind of an event where people got to know these guys a little bit, ask some questions, be involved in a program. It was completely different than anything we've ever done before. It was a very much not your typical evening, and we hope to make this an annual event and just change the people involved.
How much did you make?
We made roughly about $75,000 from that event, and as a first attempt at it, our real goal was to sort of, and again, I'm biased, but Michael can answer that, but our real goal was to give people an evening that they're going to walk out of there thinking, boy, that was a great evening, and I'd love to come back.
It was a lot of fun.
I'm just thinking of the kids that can't make it, and most probably cannot put all that money into it.
Yeah.
What do you do? Well, how do you?
Well,
is anybody disqualified because of money?
We try not to. And, we're hoping that's not the case. I'll go back to Michael's situation. Michael was very good at helping his kids fundraise and getting other donations towards his program so that his athletes all made the team last time, right? We also have chairmen for various sports whose jobs it will be to help us with the fundraising for those sports and those teams. And we have other individuals. So we have a huge group of people looking for people to donate to our Adopt an Athlete program. We also have that $8,000 or $8,500, by the way, doesn't include our pre-camp. That's sort of our gift to our athletes. That's about a $1,200 per athlete cost that we are fundraising completely on our own for. It's not being charged to the athletes. And so we have people who want to support that because that's what they believe in, that part of it, so they'll donate to the Israel experience. We have a lot of people helping us out with an Adopt an Athlete program, and that will help the subsidies for our athletes. And then we still have to run our organization. As I said before, we have an executive director and a national office director. We have 2 paid people. To put it in perspective, we have about 1/6 to 1/7 the number of paid people that the Canadian Olympic Association has, and we send more people to these games than they sent to the Summer Olympics in China. So it just puts it in perspective a little bit. And as I said, we're a volunteer-driven organization. People, the quality of Michael, who gives up a lot of his time, well appreciated, but still gives up a lot of his time to help out. And so we're out there beating the bushes and trying to find people who believe in connecting Jewish youth to Israel. And that's really the message.
Say that again.
We're trying to connect Jewish youth to Israel. And what struck me about 3 years ago in the Canadian Jewish News was an article written at a conference that Natan Sharansky spoke at. And what he said was that the goal of every country, from a Jewish point of view, should be connecting every young Jewish person to the state of Israel. And that's what we do. That's our attempt at doing it. Other organizations do it in different ways. We do it through sport. We get the added benefit that sports helps us become better people, hopefully, in better qualities. And that also helps lead our kids into better positions, community leaders down the road. So we have a double-edged sword, but really connecting Jewish athletes to the state of Israel and to their Jewish identity is critical. We have these bands that says Maccabi Canada equals Jewish pride. And that's really what we're all about, and that's our message. We have this acronym that describes our organization now, and it's called FITTER. And FITTER stands for fun, because this has to be fun. If this isn't fun, Michael's not doing it, I'm not doing it, our athletes aren't doing it. Integrity, transparency, trust, engagement of Jewish youth, and respect. And those are the values that sit in our office in front of everyone. We try to live by them every day, and we believe that if we can do that and reach out to the people that share our goals of Jewish identity being important to our next generation, we'll be successful. It's a lot of hard work, and it's not a slam dunk, but we feel very positive about the direction we're taking.
Three of your kids played. Two of the kids played in the Maccabi games. What do they say that they got out of it?
Silver medal, which is on the pictures. Not beating the U.S. twice. That always stays in the back of my mind too. The relationships, the bonds. Here's a great picture of a team dinner. Those are the things that they remember and they'll never forget.
So it's made a lasting, eternal.
Friendships for life.
And friendships and impressions and bonding. And we'll be back with more about the Maccabi games, what the staff get out, what the coaches get out of it, what the kids get out of it, and what it's all about. Tommy, you, after being very deeply involved in the Maccabi movement, you left, and then you came back. What made you come back?
I just saw an opportunity for me to make a bigger difference from my perspective of my life to the next generation, and I really wanted to come back to instill in Maccabi the ideals that Jewish identity and becoming ambassadors for the State of Israel through sport was really where I wanted to take this organization, and it was an opportunity to do that. We had a great organization, and I think that it was just sort of the next natural step, and I wanted to be involved in that, and asked my wife, thought she'd say no, said yes, and here I am.
Things have changed, though. You've instituted some changes since you've come back.
I think the biggest change is that we're really stressing, always we're going to stress elite sports. That's who we are, right? And getting quality coaches like Michael and searching high and low for every athlete is what we do. And trying to find those kids who are connected, not connected, that's really important. But I think the message for us, the biggest change is our message of really trying to promote the other aspects of the games, the Jewish identity aspect of it, learning about Israel, giving back, volunteering while we're there, making that an important part of the trip. And then, of course, the big challenge is going to be for us to take these athletes when they come back and help them get back in the community and do some work.
Yes, what happens when they come back? Is there a follow-up?
Well, there will be, for sure. We have a group of people. We have an outreach committee that just got started now, which will be in charge of sending these people out in the community, both in the Jewish and non-Jewish community, and helping them work with kids and giving talks to impress upon people the value of a healthy lifestyle, the value of being involved in sport.
So you're going to get them, when they come back after the games, to talk in their various communities.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's what the outreach program is about.
Absolutely. Yes, for sure.
What's been the response of the kids? You started to talk about someone that, because of his experience during the games, made Aliyah.
So there was a young man who played volleyball for Canada, lives out west, really came from a non-Jewish community, went over there, made the team because, as everybody else does, was a great volleyball player, and actually managed to sign a contract and move to Israel for the next year. And I don't know if he's still there. He was there for at least for a year. The person who's the head of our National Athletic Committee, Alex Branis, who's I think been involved in 8 or 9 games, Alex got assigned a professional contract to play basketball in Israel and lived in Israel for the year after, although he'd been in Israel when he was growing up as a child, but had come to Canada at a young age. And so there's a lot of athletes that get a benefit out of the games, could go far beyond the actual competition. There's a young man who came to Canada from Ethiopia at the age of 13 to Montreal and then moved to Toronto. I befriended him and his father. He's a world-class runner. His times at the age of 14 were faster than a gentleman named Sebastian Coe, who was the world record holder at the time when he was 14 in the same distance, 800 meters. Joseph won the Canadian cross-country championships 3 years, and we did a video for Maccabi about 7 or 8 years ago, and we highlighted Joseph on that. And Joseph said that Maccabi was where he learned how to be a person. He had the support system around him and the people around him to help him grow as an individual. And he's now given back in many, many ways to the Jewish community and community in general. And there's all kinds of stories. My year, there was a gentleman, Mark Bendahan, who was considered to be the best Jewish fastball pitcher in the world. And Mark's been coming to games. In fact, he competed for us in Brazil. It's been now 26 years later. his son is also on the team now. And
Oh,
what a
does that
wonderful
happen?
opportunity to do that.
Does that happen generations?
Well, here you go. You've got Michael coaching, his son's playing. You've got Mark and Josh on the same team. With me, I played a little bit on that team as well. And, out of pity for those guys letting me play, but it was a lot of fun, and having Mark and his son be part of that. And that's him instilling that into his kids, and Josh will instill into his kids, and that's sort of how it grows. And so there's been a lot of opportunities for our athletes to gain benefit. And in this day and age, you make friends with somebody in Israel or somebody in another part of the world where they come from to the games, you can stay in contact with them so easily. Skype.
Is that what happens? Do they have much interaction with the other countries when you're in Israel?
They do, but probably not enough. But there's limited time as well.
There is, but I think the bottom line is I can think of a half a dozen people right now who for sure are keeping in touch with their other teammates from Canada who came from communities that were not heavily Jewish and didn't have any Jewish support, so that's great.
And within Canada, absolutely.
Yeah.
Within Canada.
Absolutely. And we have a lot of programs that also revolve between us and the States, and there's a natural bond. The Americans have been great with us. They have a wonderful organization. They've been really helpful to us whenever we needed some assistance. They've been there for us, and we like to think we were there for them. But it's just the way it is. Everybody's there together. This is not the Olympics where you want to beat each other's brains in and then just leave and come back. This is play your game. I'll tell you the example of the finals in the Open men's basketball in Brazil. You had Israel and Brazil, and when the game was over, they all got in the center and they all danced the Hava Nagila, gave each other hugs, and I think that doesn't exist anywhere else. And this gentleman Alex, who I was telling you, if you see him in the picture in the white shirt over there, he's our head of our National Athletic Committee. He was the point guard and the star of our men's masters team. We played against Brazil. We were huge underdogs, and I mentioned we won. The person covering Alex in that game one-on-one was a gentleman, Avi Gelber, who was the head of the organizing committee for the games. He also played on their team. These guys beat each other up for 40 minutes. They were bruised and battered, and at the end of the game, they met at center court, gave each other a kiss and a hug, and walked off arm in arm. That's what the Maccabi Games is all about.
And you don't find that in other competitive sports?
Definitely not. Definitely not.
That kind of feeling?
Definitely not. It's a lifetime of a feeling. That moment, I'll never forget watching Alex and Avi. I'm sure they didn't forget it. And it's really what it's all about. And it's such a special feeling of success that you've made it there, and of the friendships that you've developed, and of the bigger meaning of Jewish identity and the love of Israel and solidarity and the centrality of Israel in all of our lives. And that's really what it's all about for me.
Well, I wish you a lot of success in the upcoming 2013 games.
Thank you very much. Thank you
And
very much.
you'll come back and tell us what happened after, who's involved, and what Canada did and how you did. But I get the feeling that's secondary from the experience, the bonding, the internalization of Jewishness and connecting with Jews from all over the world in the heart of the Jewish world, in Israel. That's more what it's about than the actual winning.
It's truly special. I'm sure that Michael still wants to beat the Americans, and I want him to do that. But you're right. It's a much bigger picture than just simply playing sports.
I thank you both for giving your time, and I thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.